$1 trillion vision for India. The question that truly matters is how do we grow while preserving our democracy? How do we achieve development while maintaining the dignity of every citizen? These are not questions only for policymakers. These are questions for each and every one of us in the room, every business leader, every entrepreneur, and every citizen. And to answer this question and many more, we have one of the sharpest minds and the most eloquent voices of our times. Clearly needs no introduction, but his achievement deserves acknowledgement. An acclaimed member of parliament, a very celebrated author of more than 20 books, and a former international diplomat. He is one personality who's bringing India's voice to the global stage. And joining him in this conversation is a leader who's transformed CREDAI with his vision and dynamism. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Shashi Tharoor in conversation with Chairman CREDAI, Mr. Boman Irani.
Do I say good morning or good afternoon? I guess it's closer to afternoon. Well, friends, we have here a person who most people have been trying to request to speak normal English so that we all can understand what he says. And I actually told him that I might be carrying a dictionary with me in case he uses words that are too big for me. But he's been kind enough to promise me to follow Abraham Lincoln and get the message across, not use the language, overuse the language, or use the language well. I don't know how to switch this on, guys. So thank you very much for being here.
Good to be with you, Boman. And
Dr. Shashi
I think
Tharoor.
everyone who's actually had a conversation with me knows that all this troll stuff is grossly exaggerated, and you can kindly put away your dictionaries and just enjoy the conversation.
I mean, for those of you that haven't seen it, he's done a stand-up comic for about 5 or 10 minutes in which something about mummy, papa saying that come here, Shashi, and tell us about what you learn in English, and we'll request you to do that at the end. But the first question that I want to ask you, and you're very unlike most of the other politicians I've met, how did you come into politics?
You know, quite by accident, actually, Boman. I have to say that I never thought I would get into politics. I came from a very conventional middle-class professional background. My father was the Bombay manager of the Statesman paper, then the advertisement manager in Calcutta. I sort of had a sort of conventional sort of life and upbringing. And I must admit that as far as representing people or articulating their voices was concerned, that's something I enjoyed, largely because from early days in school, I was active in debating and school theater and that sort of stuff. So kind of I was a slightly familiar figure to my peers and my classmates, and I had that kind of attention. I was elected president of the college union at St. Stephen's in Delhi. I was elected staff representative when I was in America in graduate school at the Fletcher School, and I was even the first elected chairman of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees staff way back more than 40 years ago. So, I mean, I had, if you like, found without making any effort that people seemed to want me to represent their voices and their ideas. But I never thought of it as anything possible in India, because in India, our politics is a fairly closed world. There's a particular group of people who have traditionally dominated our politics, going back to the nationalist movement and the sons and daughters and relatives of that lot, and one never thought of it as a world one could enter. So I went and had a career for 29 years at the United Nations, and then was talked into running for the top job of Secretary General, which I must say I enjoyed the challenge, and it was a good race. There were 7 candidates, including a sitting president of a country, a couple of deputy prime ministers, several foreign ministers, and a prince And I managed to come second in that lot, which wasn't too bad, but it was still second. As Groucho Marx used to say, is no cigar, close but no cigar. So I came second, and then sort of essentially found myself ending at the age of 51 a career that I had normally assumed would have taken me till retirement. So there I was suddenly looking around for what to do, and I was telling them, and I decided that I would just examine my options while trying to do some money making on the side. One thing in America is they pay you for speeches. So I was getting $50,000 a speech almost 20 years ago. And that meant that 10 speeches, I was making more than my salary at the UN previously. And then, of course, there was also the fact that I was consulting for a couple of firms which had an interest in India. So I was traveling to India quite regularly. And to my surprise, some of these political leaders I was in touch with, out of pure courtesy, having risen to being the senior most Indian at the UN, one of the obligations or perks, depending on how you look at it, is that every time the Indian Prime Minister or head of government comes to the UN General Assembly, I tend to meet them. I mean, as the senior Indian, I had to meet them anyway. But on top of that, when they have the 15, 20 minutes of wait time before they go up to the podium, they are entertained by the senior Indian. And so I got to see Vajpayee Sahab, I got to see Manmohan Singh Sahab, whom I'd already met earlier in Geneva. I, of course, knew all the foreign ministers, Jaswant Singh, Yashwant Sinha. The whole lot of them had been people I had contact with. So when I visited Italy, I used to keep in touch with them. And I was somewhat pleasantly surprised when, perhaps because of all the attention that my unsuccessful run for Secretary General had generated, the Congress Party asked me, would you like to contest the next election? And though in some ways it was my ignorance that led me to say yes, because I left India at 19 when the voting age, the minimum voting age was 21. So I had never even voted in an election, never seen it from the inside. And I said yes rather foolishly, and then embarked on the toughest thing I'd ever done in my life, contesting the elections of 2009. It was really harder than walking through minefields in Bosnia, which I had done as a UN peacekeeper. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I won, and I'm proud to say I've won 4 times since. So it does look like I've found a niche in this particular domain as well.
Remarkable. You know, one thing that we as Indians are extremely proud of is the fact that you represented us after Operation Sindoor in the US. My question is, how did the US take to our narrative? What exactly was...
You know, extremely well. And I know that many of you would find that hard to believe given all that's happened since then. But we had an amazingly successful visit. It wasn't just the US. We first went to 4 Latin American countries and went on thereafter to Washington. In fact, on the way to Washington, I had a visit in Colombia, which had a left-wing president who immediately after we bombed in Operation Sindoor had immediately issued a statement expressing heartfelt condolences to the victims in Pakistan. So I was astonished when I landed in Colombia to hear this and that we had not been able to do anything about it. So I held a press conference in which I publicly expressed my disappointment at the lack of understanding of what had happened, and then I laid the case out. Fortunately, the former Colombian ambassador in Delhi had been a friend of mine. She hosted a private dinner where the foreign ministry people were there, and I gave them the full inside story of how exactly Sindoor had happened and why, the Pahalgam attack and all of that. And the next morning, when we had the formal meeting at the foreign ministry, they withdrew their statement supporting Pakistan and expressed support for India. So it was that kind of, we had all those successes on the way. And when we got to Washington, we did not see Mr. Trump. It's not surprising because it's relatively rare for the president of a country like the US to receive visiting parliamentarians. We did see the president of Guyana, we did see the president of Panama, we saw the vice president of Brazil and of Colombia, but nonetheless, in America, we went all the way up to Vice President Vance. I had a very, very good meeting with Vance in the White House. I also had meetings with pretty much everyone else who mattered in the American foreign policy establishment. The entire State Department bureaucracy, such as it was, because in America, Some of the appointments had not yet been made and some of the confirmations had not yet happened. So there was no Assistant Secretary for South Asia. We met the Deputy Secretary of State, his boss. We met the entire bureaucracy dealing with South Asia. We met the entire Senate Foreign Relations Committee and all their people. We met the House Foreign Relations Committee, met all the influential think tanks. I myself spoke at the Council on Foreign Relations in dialogue with a former American ambassador to India, Ken Juster. I had an excellent interaction with the national media, the National Press Club. I also did some TV appearances and media interviews. There was literally, we touched every base imaginable in Washington. And everywhere our message got through. And how do you know your message gets through? Because A, they listen, and B, they react in a positive way. So Vance, for example, said to me, when I explained how we had conducted Operation Sindoor with such great, precise, calibrated, targeted strikes that we didn't even hit Pakistani military sites on that first night. Forget Pakistani government sites or civilian sites. We didn't even hit the military sites, even though we know the military backs these terrorists. We just wanted to hit terror camps, known to be terror camps by everybody, listed by the US State Department list, listed in the UN sanctions list. So everyone knows that what we're doing is absolutely only retribution against terrorism. And that message we conveyed from the very start. In fact, we added, as you know, that if Pakistan hit back, we would be forced to retaliate. But if they stopped, we would also stop. And that's exactly the signal we sent on all 4 days of Operation Sindoor. And when the Pakistanis on the 4th day said, let's stop, let's call it off, we said, let's call it off, and that was that. So our message was we were responsible. And why? Because we are focused on our economic development, on our growth, on our technology, on our real estate, all of that stuff. We don't have time to be distracted by war. And we know that we need investment, we need growth, and investors don't like war zones, and we have no desire to reduce this wonderful country into a war zone. So that was not our interest. But when terrorists do this kind of thing, when they come and target innocent holidaymakers on the basis of their religion and kill them, there's something that we cannot let go unpunished.
Absolutely.
So I explained that very clearly. And I also said, remember, we didn't need persuading. I was asked in Washington, what about Mr. Trump claiming credit for ending the war? So I said, look, we have great respect for the American presidency and the American president, but we never needed persuading because from day one, we made it very clear that if Pakistan was willing to stop, we would stop. We were not interested in war. So at no stage did anyone need to tell us you must stop. But I said, we don't know what messaging went on between Washington and Islamabad. So if America and Mr. Trump played a role in persuading Pakistan to stop, of course, as a peace-loving nation, we're very grateful. I think that message was very well received in Washington. Perhaps that could have also been used coming out of Delhi, but in the end, it so happened that, as you know, that didn't come across in quite the same way because Washington, or at least Mr. Trump personally, seems to have taken it very badly that we denied him any credit. But the truth is, how could we be the ones giving credit when we never needed to be persuaded? And I can tell you, he never called us. There was a big gap between the call that he made to the Prime Minister after Pahalgam's incident and the call he made to the Prime Minister after his premature departure from the G7 in Ottawa, which is when he cancelled a meeting with Mr. Modi and went off to Washington. The gap between those two was April 22nd and June 17th. In between, there was no call from Mr. Trump. And the calls from other levels, Vice President Vance called once, Secretary of State Marco Rubio called. He's also double-hatted now as National Security Advisor, so in that capacity, he called Mr. Doval as well. All those conversations, I was told basically what was said. There was nothing about bringing about peace. There was nothing about using trade or denying India trade if we didn't bring peace. Whatever, and all of that stuff that we're hearing subsequently from the president, nobody in India had heard directly or indirectly from the Americans. So we don't quite know what lies behind some of the unpleasantness that has come out after that. But as far as India was concerned, I believe we conducted ourselves very responsibly. And what is interesting is, Mr. Vance said to me after listening to my explanations, he said, we respect the restraint and responsibility you have shown throughout this operation. So we had the right response. And that's why, Boman, when you say, how did America react? As far as we were concerned, when we left, we thought we had a great success story. In fact, Bilawal Bhutto was in Washington the same time as us. He didn't see people at the level we saw. He never reached the vice president. He didn't see half the senators we saw. Many didn't want to talk to Pakistan. Our messaging really had got through very, very effectively. And he was reduced to claiming, but we in Pakistan are also victims of terrorism. To which my response was, listen, Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, famously said, you can't breed a nest of vipers in your backyard and expect them to bite only your neighbors. And that's what happened to Pakistan. Yes, they are victims of terror, and I feel great sympathy for Bilawal that he lost his mother to terrorist attacks. But the fact is, we didn't create that problem. This is like the famous story of Frankenstein, where you build a monster and the monster escapes your control. That's what's happened to Pakistan.
Well, I'd love to be a fly on the wall when Mr. Bilawal was talking to the same people that you went and put your case across to, and it'd be such an interesting conversation to know. But after all that you've said, and you've said that everything went quite well, we common folk believe that the tariffs were an outcome of not handling this properly. Is that the right way to look at it?
Look, Mr. Trump is a very mercurial individual, and the American system gives the president an amazing amount of leeway. Of course, even though there have been 44 or 45 presidents before him, no one's ever seen this kind of behavior coming out of the White House. So, I mean, he really is an unusual president by every yardstick, and certainly he does not honor the conventional standards of diplomatic behavior. I mean, have you ever heard of any world leader openly saying that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize? Never happened before, right? Have you heard of any sort of world leader saying things like, oh, all the countries in the world want to come and kiss my ass? Quote unquote, exact words, right? Have you heard of any world leader who has basically said, oh, India and Russia have dead economies, I don't care if they go down the drain together? I mean, this is not the kind of language we've ever heard from any head of government or president. So Mr. Trump is unusual, and I would beg you not to judge our performance by his behavior, because he is a law unto himself.
For those of you that don't know, Mr. Trump is one of the most successful, or claims to be one of the most successful developers in the US. So,
I mean, your profession, guys, please don't learn from him. I think he's also been through more bankruptcies than all of you put
yes,
together.
Absolutely, famously. So, Dr. Tharoor, now that brings me to the question that, it's a multipolar world right now that we live in. Where do you see India, and the words that, I'd like you to kind of, focus on are, where do you see India positioning itself? Do you see us being a balancer, a leader of the global south, or would you just say something entirely new and opportunities thereof?
All of the above. But before we get there, let me briefly just say one more thing about the tariffs. The truth is the tariffs have had a very, very negative impact on our country. Already people are losing jobs. 135,000 people in Surat have been laid off in the German jewelry business. There are job losses in Tirupur in garment manufacturing. There are potential job losses in Vishakhapatnam for the shrimp and seafood marine exports. We are hurting, and I don't want anyone to have any illusions that we can just wash it off. I mean, the truth is, you can, if you want, brazen it out saying, look, $48 billion lost in a $4 trillion economy is just a blip. We can sustain it, tighten our belts, and move on. Well, we may have no choice but to tighten our belts and move on anyway, because obviously at even the 25% that existed before, a lot of things were completely unviable. At 50, they're totally impossible to actually break into the American market and any of those items, because all our competitors don't have tariffs at that level. If you look at all the sectors I mentioned, the labor-intensive sectors I mentioned, you've got Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Laos, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and all of them are between 15 and 20% tariff. We are even at the base level 25, and today we are at 50. And I happened to meet somebody at breakfast this morning who said that, for example, in marine products and shrimp exports, there was already in any case an anti-dumping duty of 2.8% and a countervailing duty of another 5.8%. So they were already having an 8.6 burden before all of these tariffs kicked in. So now it's 58.6% that they're dealing with. That's not possible. So we are finding it very difficult to get into the American market. And I am pleased to say that we are actually negotiating, knowing very well that we need some access to America. And it's possible that we might be able to make good headway on that first 25%. In other words, if we've come to a mutual accommodation, find a basic trade deal with America, that 25 could come down, if we are lucky, to 16, 19, maybe 20. And at that, we can at least compete with the other Asian countries. But the second 25% is not tariffs, it's actually sanctions. And it is a sanction against us for buying oil from Russia. Now, that's totally unfair because the Chinese buy more oil and gas from Russia. They don't have a sanction. The Turks buy more oil and gas from Russia, and they don't have a sanction. They're a NATO ally. We have somehow been made an example of as if we're uniquely evil. And the truth is that even the European Union, which Mr. Trump is exhorting them now to impose a sanction on us, the European Union actually gives more billions of euros every year to Russia than we do. We're spending about $53 billion buying oil and gas. The European Union has reduced its purchases of oil and gas, but their purchases of other items has taken their total import bill to 67.8 billion euros. So how can you argue that European money or Chinese money or Turkish money doesn't fuel the Russian war machine in Ukraine, but India's money does? That seems to me an absolutely unfair thing. And I certainly hope that India will stick to its guns, saying either you have a uniform policy for everybody who buys from Russia, but then what happens if nobody's buying from Russia? Everyone will be competing for the same Middle Eastern oil, and everyone's prices will go up, including the American voter at the petrol pump in America. So therefore, they do want some people not to be competing for the same sources of oil in the Middle East. This is why this entire sanction policy seems to me completely bizarre and unsustainable. But anyway, until that second sanction is removed, however successfully we negotiate a basic trade deal, we still have an enormous problem. That's the first thing I want to say. Now, because of that, and that's why I mentioned it before answering Boman's question, because of that, we have no choice but to diversify in two areas. One is diversify our export markets. We are moving ahead very rapidly to conclude a trade deal with the EU. We will certainly need to try and do more. We've got a UK trade deal, which is great. 99% of our export items to the UK are now duty-free. So it's going to be, if you're in the export business, in addition to your real estate work, you know that this is going to be boom time when it comes to trade with the UK. And maybe there'll be some enterprising Indians in the UK who will import all the stuff that America used to buy and repackage it as made in the UK and send it back to America. That's another story. But apart from that, the truth is that here, when you look at what exactly we have to do, we also have to diversify our lines of political communication to other countries. If we're going to be in the doghouse with America, we can't just afford to sit there and say we have no other options. This is why the Prime Minister has gone to China, why President Putin is coming from Russia, why we are essentially showing a serious intent, at least to move away from confrontation to conversation with China. Even though we've had some very, very tough times in that relationship, I think we will find ourselves trying to open up very much more to China than we have done in the last 5-6 years. As far as Russia is concerned, the relationship is always reasonably stable, but it may become warmer now if the Russians, as you know, in reaction to all of this, have dropped their oil prices even more. So we're getting a very good deal on Russian oil and gas right now. We have every incentive not to stop doing that. And at the same time, we are, when we talk about a multipolar world, I think we have to recognize that at the moment, there are really only two poles, that's America and China. Russia is no longer as major a pole as it used to be. And certainly we are not yet there. The Europeans are not yet there because partially they're so fragmented and so dependent on America. One of the things that I have personally been advocating, and some of you may have read my op-eds and all of this, is that we start making more common cause with the Europeans. They're democracies, we're a democracy, they're pluralist, we're pluralist, they have some complementary strengths to us. And if we can be together on everything from defense cooperation, intelligence cooperation, economic investment. If Indian migrant labor can be welcomed more into the European market, into European economies, and so on, we can actually become complementary, and together we can create and constitute yet another pole. So in an ideally multipolar world, there would be a Russian, an American pole and a Chinese pole, but there would also be an Indo-European pole, which would actually have some clout and heft in the world if we can have the vision to try and create that going. That would be my sort of short answer to the broad approach of your question.
Dr. Tharoor, you can ignore this question, but isn't Pakistan doing a better job at handling the Chinese-American relationships? I mean, they're seeming to float in both the boats very happily.
Look, I won't ignore the question, but I may not say everything that I can tell you privately. Look, the fact is that Pakistan has had a long relationship with America. You may remember, all of you heard of NATO, but you may not have heard of CETO and CENTO, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization and the Central Treaty Organization, both of which Pakistan was a member of at a time when non-aligned India was staying away from alliances. So from those days of the 50s, the Pakistani military has had a fairly intimate relationship with the American military. Many of the Pakistani officers were trained in American military institutions. The intelligence cooperation between the two countries was already high, but became particularly high when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. And American intelligence worked with Pakistani intelligence to create the Mujahideen, who finally successfully pushed the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. So you really had a situation where America and Pakistan, the American deep state and the Pakistani deep state, if you want to use that terminology, were very closely enmeshed. And that doesn't disappear overnight. Many of these Pakistani generals are batchmates of American generals or other senior officers. There's that kind of closeness that is already there. Don't ever forget that. We don't have it to the same degree as they have. Secondly, there is also the fact that for the longest time, till the American withdrawal from Afghanistan about 2 years ago, or what was it, 3 years ago, till then, America and Pakistan had a lot of stuff in common, right? They were, America needed Pakistan as a logistics base, as a base to go and supply their troops in Afghanistan and so on. So they already had a certain dependence on Pakistan that made them overlook some of Pakistan's sins. For example, despite the fact that the Pakistanis hid Osama bin Laden on their soil, and the Americans had to ferret him out and kill him on Pakistani soil, despite that, Pakistani-American cooperation continued in other areas. The Americans have this amazing ability to compartmentalize. They know that the Pakistanis are incubating, training, and deploying terrorists against India and now against Afghanistan also. But from the American point of view, they see Pakistan as an ally in their anti-terrorism battle against ISIS, Khorasan, or other groups which are also against the Pakistani state. So you must get the context that America-Pakistan relations are much deeper than we in India have allowed ourselves to understand. Then you might say, but Pakistan is completely a vassal state of China. So why would the Americans want to trust Pakistan when we know that they see China as their biggest rival? And the irony is that, yes, but America found even that useful about Pakistan. Because if you remember back in 1970, when Henry Kissinger made President Nixon's famous opening to China, it was via Pakistan. It was from a Pakistani base that he flew to Beijing. The Pakistanis have been a very important conduit for communications between America and China. And even today, the fact that Pakistan can be a very good source of information about China, Chinese weapons, Chinese technology, and so on to the Americans is actually quite useful to the Americans. Even that is not held against them. Given all of that, let us not be surprised that Pakistan continues to enjoy a certain level of sympathetic access. I can tell you frankly, when I was in Washington, I asked a very very senior counterterrorism person in America, I said, why do you guys give the Pakistanis a free pass? And he said, because they help us in counterterrorism. So I said, you got to be kidding. He said, no. He said, for example, they gave us the Abbey Gate bomber. Now, what is the Abbey Gate bomber? You remember when the Americans were withdrawing from Kabul, there was a bomb explosion, a suicide bomber in Kabul airport gate. The gate was called Abbey Gate. And that gate, that explosion killed 23 American Marines. So the Americans are really desperately looking for someone to catch and punish for that. The Pakistanis handed over a fellow and said, this is the guy who did it. So then I spoke to a counterterrorism expert, very well-known American professor called C. Christine Fair. And Christine tells me that the Americans are basically being played by the Pakistanis. This fellow is not even number 1, 2, or 3 in the ISIS Khorasan operations in Pakistan. He's just a scapegoat the Pakistanis have handed over to make the Americans happy. And the Americans are happy to be fooled. And that was her explanation. I shouldn't put words in anybody else's mouth, but that's the way it's coming. So even there, the fact that Pakistan conducts the terror operations is not being held against them. So I'm being very frank to all of you. This is part of the challenge we have when it comes to the question of American sympathy for Pakistan. Now, on top of that, Mr. Trump has some personal interests or sympathies. His family is apparently invested in Pakistani cryptocurrency, and there's some sympathy there. Plus, don't forget General Asim Munir, out of sort of field marshal or failed marshal, as we call him. He has also nominated President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize at a time when we are saying that Mr. Trump didn't make any peace with us. So all of these things may have contributed, Boman. I mean, when you say that, yes, the Pakistanis are doing better than us, in the short term, yes. But in the longer term, Pakistan is essentially, if not yet a failed state, it is a flailing state. Its economy is in complete shambles. It is living from bailout to bailout from the IMF. It is essentially a state that's pretty much an ungovernable mess in many places. It continues to generate large numbers of unemployed and unemployable young men who are more easily distracted by Kalashnikovs and terrorism because there's nothing else they can do in that state and that economy. In those circumstances, are you really going to sit in Washington and decide Pakistan is a more useful ally for you than India? Never. I mean, a more useful partner, I should not say ally, because we don't believe in alliances anyway. We are multi-aligned. But they will certainly, I think, eventually see the greater utility of our relationship. So we've got to stick it out. I've already written 2 or 3 articles in the last few weeks saying we have to play the long innings. I don't know how many of you are cricket fans here, but I wrote a column when Cheteshwar Pujara retired, reminding our foreign policy makers that kind of art of playing the defensive strokes when you need to and looking for scoring opportunities when they present themselves is the best way to build a long innings and build a big score. I think if India does that with America, we will definitely have better results than Pakistan does. But we have to play the long innings to get there.
I'd like to say a big thank you to you for that answer because I know you touched upon some political sensitivities as well. Thank you. Now, I think enough about that. And I'm not going to touch upon your historical knowledge because, there are plenty and more videos that we can all look at.
You still want to ask me about China, don't you? I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, China continues to be the threat that we also are concerned about in India, right? So at all points of time.
It's a threat and an opportunity. They say the Chinese character for crisis is made up of 2 characters, one saying danger, one saying opportunity. And that's the way we should see the Chinese thing. Because right now, honestly, we're in a situation where we've had a few years of really bad relations. And in the last few months, you may be aware that China held back all the rare earths that are indispensable for battery manufacturing and other things in India. Rare earth minerals are not coming. They've held back tunnel boring machines. They've held back many power stations. They have basically held back a lot of the capital equipment that Indian manufacturers import from China. And on top of that, they withdrew 300 engineers and technicians from the Foxconn factories that are making the Apple 17. So they've shown us very clearly how badly they can squeeze us. And they're playing a tough game. But today, we have gone back to them, and they know and we know. They know that we have come from a position of weakness and vulnerability, and we know that they know that. But fortunately, I think we have the brains and the spine to be able not to give away the store, even as we realize we need to get some things back from them. I think you're going to start seeing more Chinese investment in India. I think we're going to remove some of the restrictions. That's guesswork. I'm not in the government. I'm in the opposition, so I don't have access to any decisions. But my guess is that there will be more investment coming in. Already in yesterday's papers, there's some indication that BYD wants to move in here in a big way and sell 3,000 cars a month in India, which in fact may not be a bad deal because even with 70% taxes on imported EVs, Their cars are cheaper and better, most people tell me, than the Tesla is. So you can certainly see that happening. You're likely also to see the BYD, I mean, not just the BYD, you're likely to see Chinese investment coming into other sectors where we had held them off so far. I don't know about real estate. I don't even know whether you need investment in real estate from the Chinese, but there might even be that. So there's a lot of things happening in that area, which I think on the whole is good for us, because why we need more foreign investment is we need to generate jobs. The biggest issue in our economy is that we don't have enough jobs to employ the young people coming on stream. So if we can generate those jobs, we're in much better shape than otherwise.
Okay. Now, there are a few questions I want to ask you. How does Shashi Tharoor, the intellectual, survive inside Shashi Tharoor, the politician? You may give it your tongue-in-cheek humor, if you may.
No, look, Boman, seriously, I'm a human being with a number of reactions to the world. And some of those reactions manifest themselves in my writing and my speaking and my thinking aloud. And some of them manifest themselves in my work. When I was at the UN, I was doing all sorts of, I worked for refugees, I worked in peacekeeping, I handled the crisis in the former Yugoslavia, I worked alongside the Secretary General in his personal office, traveling the world with him, meeting heads of state and government. I ran the biggest department of the UN at one point for 6-7 years. So I have done all of those things while at the same time preserving, if you like, my thinking, my writing, because that was indispensable to who I was as a human being. George Bernard Shaw famously said once that I write for the same reason a cow gives milk. And that's essentially, I mean, if the cow didn't give milk, it would really be in pain, right? Because it's inside you, it's got to come out. And that's very much true for my reactions to the world as well. In politics, that's not always an asset, Boman, because you can often end up causing offense or alienating people in your own party or in other parties by speaking your mind. But I do tend to do that. And so far, touch wood, I have been able, despite being in professions which call for a certain amount of restraint, discretion, political sensitivity, or diplomatic sensitivity earlier in the UN, I've been able, I believe, to preserve my intellectual integrity, to stand up for what I believe in, and to articulate those convictions in a way that has meant something to the people who have heard me or read me. And that remains very important to me. So I won't let that go.
And it's not a conflicting, virtue to have being a politician and being intellectual, right?
Look, it can be a conflicting, let's be very honest. But my rule is very simple. Don't say anything you don't believe. But sometimes don't say something you do believe. Just shut up. Because the truth is that, my late boss, Kofi Annan, often said to me, there are no stupid questions, there are only stupid answers. And it's a very sensible thing to remember. People will ask you anything, and if you fall into the trap of answering the questions and speaking your mind, you may actually rub a few people the wrong way. And believe me, I've done it a few times in Indian politics, so you know what I'm talking about. I'm learning to bite my tongue occasionally now.
Dr. Tharoor, what would you say the future generation should remember you as? The diplomat, the thinker, the politician, or the writer?
Look, I mean, I am all of those things I'd like to think, but the truth of the matter is that in a profession like politics, or even earlier in the UN, I have to be conscious that every position is transient. I'm already a former minister. One day I'll be a former MP. But I hope I'll never be a former writer. And therefore, that is the best of me. It's what I put down on the page when I'm sitting alone with my computer screen and my keyboard, where I put out what I genuinely feel, think about, what I've thought through, what I share. Sometimes the very act of writing helps you think through what you believe and what you want to share with the world. And that, to my mind, is what I've really valuably left behind. When I come across young people in their 20s clutching copies of my book, The Great Indian Novel, and telling me how much it meant to them, it immensely gratifies me, because they weren't born when I published that book, and there's that. Every day I have the gratification of encountering people, whether in hotel lobbies or airports or whatever, telling me that things I have said or written, very often said these days, we're much more oral culture now, have inspired them or have made them make some choices in their lives or make some decisions in their lives. That's the kind of satisfaction that in the end will be far more lasting and enduring than the satisfaction that may come out of holding a ministerial position or having a red light on your car or a VIP treatment. I mean, at the end of the day, those things come and go, and I think you have to see the transience of them to understand.
Absolutely. And I remember Shalvi just coming up and saying she reads your writings and she's pretty inspired by it. And while we are there, she's also putting up a store, a bookstore. And at some point of time, we'll send you an invite to come and inaugurate it if
Why not? That'd be
possible
fun.
for you.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, when somebody of the young generation puts up a big store, I'm encouraged because we're all worried about whether people are going to be reading anymore at this time. I meet so many young parents who come and complain to me that their kids don't read other than school textbooks for homework. And they see books somehow as a punishment, as a chore, as an obligation. And it's really, really worrying at all sorts of levels. First of all, because one of the things that people are losing out on is the art of complex reading. We all read. Perhaps arguably you read as many words these days as you used to 30 years ago, but you're reading them on a screen. But what are you reading? You're reading WhatsApp forwards, right? You're reading short text, you're reading individual articles. But what serious reading requires is the kind of habits of mind that give you a chance to engage with a complex argument, a whole process of reasoning, come out with a better understanding, having expanded your mental horizons. For that, you need books. I remember telling a young mother, I said, okay, so if your son doesn't read, what is he interested in? Oh, he's only interested in football. I said, get him a book about football. There are books about football. It's something he's interested in. Maybe through reading about football, he will acquire the habit of reading for pleasure, not just reading for schoolwork.
Dr. Tharoor, does AI worry you? Because, most people are reading books also nowadays. They go to Grok and they just say, give us a summary of the book. Does AI worry you in any way?
Well, I think those who do that are cheating themselves at the end. I mean, so I think, okay, if you're really pressed for time, you know that you need to know what's in the book, but you don't have time to read it. Once in a while, that makes sense. Go and get a summary just to know broadly what it is. But I hope that at least in 8 out of 10 cases, once you've read the summary, you will actually be provoked into reading the full book, because obviously the arguments developed and expressed in a more complex way are what the author of the book wants you to engage with. As an author myself, I can say that. Otherwise, AI has its uses, even for me as a columnist, and I write a lot of columns. I find AI helps me a lot with research. A fact, a date, a name, a title can easily escape even a trained mind. And even though I've been working in these fields for a very long time, it really is a blessing for me to just go on Google Gemini and just ask, who was the foreign minister of this country in this year, and I'll get the answer. Now, you may say, yes, but they make mistakes. True, but I think 99% of the time, basic facts and basic things, they get right. And if it's a question of an opinion, then you shouldn't be getting your opinions from AI. You can perhaps understand their reasoning, but always have the wherewithal to form your own opinions. Where I would be very dismayed is if you let AI do all your work for you. One of the things that I remember early on when AI came up, a lady complaining to me, she said, I thought modern technology would do my housework and my dishes and my laundry and free me to do my creative work and write poetry. Instead, AI wants to write poetry and I still have to do the dishes and the laundry and the housework. And that, I think, is something we really have to worry about. I think it's very important that we give technology its place, but we don't let it take our place or the things that we do that make us human and make us uniquely different. The qualities of empathy, of compassion, sometimes of irrational choices that we make because we are who we are, because we're human. Those are things you can't outsource to AI, and that you shouldn't outsource to AI, and frankly, in some things that AI can't do. But I'm increasingly worried because I know that more and more, I was discovering, for example, an amusing fact that the world's greatest number of ChatGPT users are not in America, where ChatGPT was invented, it's in India. It's all our young people apparently writing their homework through ChatGPT. And that worries me. That really does worry me, because we want people who will create the ChatGPTs of tomorrow, not the ones who will use it to be the exam passers or homework submitters of today.
Nowadays, teachers have to even go through another software just to know whether the homework was done by AI itself. Horrible. Do you see this having long-term effects? Do you have any view on whether AI will benefit or take away, or which route we are taking?
Look, Boman, there's been actually indications of both good and bad already. I was, in fact, yesterday talking to some of your colleagues who had dinner with me last night about a couple of areas where AI has already hurt Indians. How many of you remember the profession called medical transcription? It was a big thing in the early years of this century. What happened was American doctors who in the old days, had to dictate their notes to a secretary. The secretary would need overtime. She would need sick leave. She'd get annual leave. She'd make mistakes in her typing. He'd have to review, correct it. She'd have to redo it. They suddenly discovered that thanks to the internet and the laying of all those fiber optic cables at the end of the last century, that they could dictate their notes into a machine at the end of the day, zing it over to India, where people with some basic medical education would sit down and transcribe all the notes while the American doctor was sleeping, zing it back to America, and when the doctor came in the next morning, all his notes were there in front of him. It was a great thing. And it became a growing business in the world, but in India particularly, we had 95% of the world's medical transcription market. There were companies mushrooming of people just doing medical transcriptions, and it became important. Doctors everywhere in the Western world, in the English-speaking world, were completely hooked on this. Within 5 years or 10 maximum, the entire business collapsed. Why? Because no one anticipated the creation of AI-enabled voice recognition software. Now, you don't even need to pay the much lower rates you're paying an Indian transcriber than your secretary. You don't need either of them. You pay one-time software, and the doctor sits in front of his computer and talks into his machine, and he sees his own words appearing in front of him on the screen through the one-time cost of software. End of it, he no longer needed the medical transcribers, and medical transcription companies collapsed. Second example, I'll take a shorter time, is the MRIs. Many of you don't know there's a major shortage of radiologists in America. So when these MRIs became all the rage, they didn't have enough people to interpret. There was a long day, several days of delay in interpreting the findings of an MRI. Then they stumbled across a brainwave, zing over the MRI to India. Indian radiologists, of which there's an abundance, they would read the analysis. They're not qualified to practice in America, but they can read the analysis, submit the explanation to the doctor in America, who would then sign off on it. Massive saving of time. We were again cornering the world market in reading MRIs. What happened? AI came in, AI reads the MRIs now. The Indian radiologists are no longer getting this lovely source of income. So you can see that there will be changes in the kinds of things that look like sunrise industries yesterday. They would be sunset industries today. And what's going to happen tomorrow? There was an Oxford Martin School study in 2020, I think it was, that said that 30% of the jobs in the world by 2030 will be jobs that don't exist today. Now, today was 5 years ago, and they're already halfway to being completely right, because there's so many jobs created as a result of AI that didn't exist in 2020. Equally, as I said, there are jobs that did exist that are being lost because of AI. How will it work out? I mean, at the end of the day, I am not a techno-determinist, as they say, but I am a techno-optimist, in that I do believe that when human beings come up with inventions and tools, eventually we find a way of making them more useful for us, and that eventually that usefulness will generate other things. History is full of stories like this, right? So right in the silent movie era, every theater hall had an orchestra pit, and they employed 30, 40 violinists, drummers, musicians to play music to accompany the silent movies. Suddenly, when sound movies happened, there was this consternation around the world. All these musicians are suddenly unemployed. But you're not going to say, let's not have sound movies because we got to protect the jobs of these people. The truth is, these people managed to find jobs in nightclubs and elsewhere. Some of them may have had to learn other jobs to do. But at the end of it, sound movies are the way we went. These kinds of technological changes will be disruptive. There will be transformations. When the automobile was invented, a whole bunch of people servicing horse carriages and buggy whips and God knows what else went out of business. People will find other things to do. It's not easy to be the first victim of a change, but change is inevitable. There may be less change in your profession. I mean, land is land, buildings are buildings, concrete is concrete, but there may be techniques that will change. I'm told by one of your colleagues, Boman, that now there's a chap who specializes in actually finding how you can optimize your construction using an AI program that will enable you to save money on your initial cost estimates, and he charges you 10% of the savings he's going to give you. That kind of thing, that actually helps you. So their AI is useful to you. It's not depriving you of jobs, it's enhancing your profits. So think of it this way, that there are things that are, let's look at the positive sides and try and make those positive sides happen for you. And at the same time, let's acknowledge the risks and do our very best to prevent those risks invading our lives.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Guys, we're coming to the end of this very interesting session. I have one question for you, Dr. Tharoor. What is tougher, writing a book, fighting an election, or just surviving Twitter?
They're all tough in very different ways. Writing a book is tough because obviously, you know, you're embarking on ideally a venture nobody else has embarked on before, and you've got to actually write something that will be of interest to people you don't know, who are an unseen public out there, whom you hope you will reach. And it's an awful lot of time and effort to make when you realize that it may not be something you pull off. That's why writing a first book is always a challenge, because you don't even know if anyone will ever publish you. Writing a second book is also a different kind of challenge, because you don't know if you can repeat the success of the first one if you've succeeded. But after a while, I think I've reached a stage now where I have, I won't say a ready-made audience, but a receptive audience that I know is awaiting my writing, and I'm hoping to be able to reach them that way. When it comes to politics, there's nothing easy about politics. I know that there's this habit amongst our professional classes in India to look down on politicians. I don't always blame you. Some of us deserve it. But at the same time, there's a perception the politicians don't do very much, have a good life, have all the perks, all the comforts. That's not true. Politicians, particularly the elected ones, the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabhas, the assemblies, these are people who are on the beck and call of their voters 24/7, who are dealing with all sorts of things that are neither intellectually satisfying nor psychologically rewarding, but which needs to be done to keep yourself viable as an electable person in your constituency. And all of these things are tough. They require you to be switched on a lot all the time. They require you to be on the ball, responsive, receptive. People are unreasonable. They'll be complaining, oh, his office never answers the phone. I mean, frankly, if all we did was answer the phone, we'd never do anything else, because there are so many people calling and making demands. But these are things that you should also realize, that politics is not an easy profession. It's a demanding one. And if you are that rare breed, I suppose, of completely honest politicians who will not take anything under the table, it's also a very, very difficult profession to manage, because your expenses vastly exceed what the government pays you to be an elected representative. So it's tough. And I will say that those who go into politics, it takes a fair amount of courage and risk-taking. In some ways, it is an act of entrepreneurship that they're doing. And finally, surviving Twitter. My God. I remember a story that Natwar Singh told me when he came into politics. He had been a diplomat in the Foreign Service, and then Congress invited him to come in and get elected to become an MP. He's a Maharaja, as you know, by background. So he showed up in a suit and tie and at his swearing in, and very apologetically said to Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi in those days, he said, ma'am, I'll get myself a few bangalas stitched. And she looked at him and said, no, Natwar, you just better grow a thicker skin. And the truth is that that's what you need in politics, because you are always going to be the victims of so many unfair attacks. You are going to be misrepresented, distorted, trashed, lied about, character assassinated, stabbed in the back, stabbed in the front. You can't even count on your own friends. There's a wonderful old story from British politics when a new MP in his first speech referred to the other side as his enemies. And immediately somebody stood up from the other side and said, wait a minute, sir, we are not your enemies. We are your adversaries. Your enemies are sitting behind you. And that is also very true very often in politics, because the ones whose ambitions are most threatened by your doing well or rising are the ones who ideally see themselves achieving what you've achieved. So it's not an easy profession at all. But when you get to something like Twitter and social media, you end up in a position where you are constantly being attacked and trolled, and in ways that if you were to pay attention to, you would be in a constant state of frustration and despair all day. So grow a thicker skin, learn to ignore some of that, and learn sometimes also not to pay any attention to some of the insane things. But I will say to all of you, ultimately, it is a privilege in any democracy to represent the public. And that, if you're conscious of the honor that that represents and the privilege you have been given to speak on behalf of people and to stand up for their interests, that ultimately ought to sustain you despite all the slings and arrows and barbs and attacks. Because at the end of the day, that's what makes it all worthwhile, trying and making a difference to other people's lives.
Before I say a big thank you to you, I've also been informed about a rare or a very good talent that you have, and that is singing.
Forget
And trust me, everyone out here, on behalf of everyone out here, I'd like to make a request. Maybe one Kishore Kumar song. So after all that just of great English, we'll have a little bit of Hindi as well.
I don't do this in public. I'm a strictly bathroom singer. But all right, since you've embarrassed me on stage, I may as well embarrass myself to wrap up the session. एक अजनबी हसीना से यूं मुलाकात हो गई, फिर क्या हुआ ये पूछो ना, कुछ ऐसी बात हो गई. कुछ ऐसी बात भी हुई हमारे बीच में.
I almost forgot this, but I have one last question. With everybody's permission, may I ask him one last question? How do you handle all the adulation you get? All the adulation from everyone who happens to be very pretty.
That I enjoy. No, listen, I mean, honestly, the honest answer is enjoy it while it lasts, because you know it won't. Ultimately, all of these things will pass, the good things as well as the bad things. And just as you have to grow a thick skin about the bad things, be a little balanced about the good things, because adulation is never permanent. And some of the same people who are praising you today may be attacking you tomorrow. Take it in stride, appreciate it for what it is, and people are giving of themselves to you by expressing their admiration. Show respect for it, show value for it, but don't let it turn your head. I'm proud of one thing which I think I acquired from my father, and which I saw in Kofi Annan as Secretary General of the UN, which is that you should be anchored in yourself, know who you are, and be the best version of yourself always. Because ultimately, everything around you can't and should not be allowed to change who you are. I've seen Kofi Annan the day he won the Nobel Prize asking me about my children's school college applications. I mean, he would have been forgiven for being literally on top of the moon, man. He's won the Nobel Prize. He's the front page headline in every newspaper in the world, every news bulletin in the world. And he's never forgotten that he's a human being dealing with other human beings. That, to my mind, is so important. And I urge you all, in your lives, in your positions, whatever position you are today, you are still you. And remember, nobody else can be you. No one can be a better you than you are. So make sure you can be the best you that you are. And the rest, I think, I won't say it's chaff or it's irrelevant. It's surround sound. It's pleasant sometimes, it's unpleasant sometimes, but it's not ultimately who you are.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi, for the enlightening session.
Thank
So
you.
there are two questions. One major question is, now there is so much disturbance in India, around India with the neighbors. You take Nepal latest, Pakistan, the fragile. Then there's your Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. How India is poised in this situation is, I want to know from your thoughts. But second, you have seen so many governments, so many foreign ministers, prime ministers, and a foreign policy. And you've seen the soft power of India since long. How do you rank this government with the soft power and the foreign policy?
Okay. On the first one, look, we have to be concerned about our neighborhood because we're living in a tough neighborhood. And the fact is that we have overtly hostile neighbors in Pakistan and China. And we have, China now less hostile perhaps, but still I can tell you that during Operation Sindoor, they were giving real-time intelligence from their satellites that were seeing where our troops were, where our planes were, where our weapons were, and feeding it to the Pakistanis in real time. So you can say that they were not exactly a friendly power. But so Pakistan and China, to begin with, we have to be on guard against, protect ourselves against. And with the other neighbors, we have to do two things. We have to ensure, first of all, that we contribute to the extent they want us to in pacifying their situation and helping them be stable, because instability in our neighbors will spill over to us. That is a genuine concern we have to worry about. And secondly, we have to learn our own lessons from what's happening in our neighbors, because they're very much like us. So we've seen now 3 countries, one after the other, where mass disturbances in the streets have toppled governments. We saw it in Sri Lanka first, then we saw it in Bangladesh, and now we're seeing it in Nepal. And there's something there that's in common in all cases, a perception on the part of the public of corruption and misgovernance at the top, of lack of transparency and accountability and arbitrariness at the top in some of the decisions being made. And at the same time, the people who are protesting are the ones who have nothing to lose because they've not been able to grow a stake in their own societies. They have no jobs, they're unemployed, they're frustrated, there's no other real opportunity and outlet for them. And therefore, what do they have to lose if they go out and they have to face tear gas shells from the police or worse? Because they really have nothing positive to look forward to or to live for. Those are circumstances we should never allow to arise in our own country. And I think it's fair to say that so far every Indian government has been more responsive, has been more conscious of the need to be accountable to the people, has paid attention to popular welfare, particularly when it comes to benefits reaching those who otherwise feel excluded and marginalized. And I think all of these things mean that it is reasonably safe to assume that we are not in the kind of condition that those 3 countries went through at this particular point. But in turn, we need to contribute in whatever ways we can to good relations with those countries and to helping pacify and stabilize and calm them down. So that's the answer to your first question. On the second one, I'm proud to say I'm the first one who came up with the whole notion of India's soft power about 25 years ago with the permission of the originator of the concept, Joseph Nye, who was a friend of mine, professor at Harvard, he's now passed away, who invented the notion of soft power and mainly wrote about America himself. Soft power being the power of attraction. Your culture, your policies, the kind of society you are, attracts people. And it's different from hard power, which is the power of military might, economic muscle, and so on. So hard power versus soft power. And I argued that India's hard power was not its strength. It's our soft power. And the examples I used were things like yoga, Ayurveda, Indian cuisine, Indian fashion, but also things like the fact that even in a country like Afghanistan with the Taliban ruling, the most popular show initially until the Taliban banned it was Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Nahi Kabhi Bahu Thi. Because Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi gave the Afghans an opportunity to understand and discuss family problems that in that society were otherwise completely brushed under the carpet or kept behind the veil, literally. So that too became an example of soft power. I read a report from not an Indian journalist, but from Reuters news agency about a car that during the broadcast timing of Kyunki Saas, that car was stripped of its every detachable part, its hubcaps, its windshield wipers, its detachable side view mirrors, everything. And the robbers crawled on the windshield, Tulsi Zindabad. Because everybody, including the Darwan, the Chaukidar, were busy watching Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi instead of minding the store. So that kind of thing shows you the appeal of Indian culture. And that, to my mind, was India's soft power. But another example of soft power I gave was how in 2004, I was traveling through the Gulf countries as a UN official. And suddenly, every minister I met, every senior government official was marveling at the fact that India had just had this election won by a political party led by a woman born in Italy of Catholic faith who had made way for a Sikh to be sworn in as prime minister by a Muslim president in a country 80% Hindu. And they said, "Wow, kamal kar diya." And my answer was, we're not doing it for you or to impress anybody. This is who we are. This is India. So that perception of the kind of society we were was an enormous soft power asset in the world. There, I fear we have slipped a little bit in recent years. Because unfortunately, there has been a certain toxin of intolerance and bigotry that has been injected into the veins of our society, which has sadly also affected perceptions of our country abroad. When a Bangladeshi friend who used to be a great fan of India comes to me and says bitterly, these days it is safer to be a cow than a Muslim in India, and I quoted that line in Parliament, so I'm not telling you anything else, I felt terrible about that, because that's not who we were. And therefore, when I wrote my book, Why I'm a Hindu, I'm a very proud Hindu, but the Hinduism, I believe, is the Hinduism of Swami Vivekananda, who very famously said in Chicago at the World Parliament of Religions that I'm proud to speak of a faith that has taught the world not just tolerance, but acceptance. What is acceptance? Tolerance is basically, tolerant king is a good king, right? He's a good guy. But what he's really saying is, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will generously indulge you in your right to be wrong. I'll give you the right to be wrong. That's all tolerance is. Whereas acceptance, which is what Vivekananda says we are all about as Indians and Hindus, acceptance says, I believe I have the truth. You believe you have the truth. I will respect your truth. Please respect my truth. Now that is a great recipe for a multicultural, multi-religious, multilinguistic society. And that was our soft power. I would love telling stories about, how when the Jews came, when the Babylonians destroyed their temple, when the Romans destroyed the temple, they came to Kerala, across the tranquil waters of the Arabian Sea. They were welcomed, they were allowed to settle down. The only Jewish diaspora in the entire world that never knew a single instance of anti-Semitic discrimination from the local population were the Jews of India. When St. Thomas, the apostle from the Bible, landed up, he was welcomed on shore by a flute-playing Jewish girl. And he had no opposition when he went around trying to convert people and preach the message of the gospel. When the Parsis came, 7th century, fleeing persecution in Persia, what happens? They come, the local Gujarati king has no Persian, so he sends an envoy to sort of through sign language tell them, listen, bhai, we have no room for you, there's no welcome. So to make his point, the guy takes a glass of water and drops a couple of stones in it, and the water overflows. So he's saying to the Parsis, sorry, no room, And the Parsi ship captain said, wait. And he brought a glass of milk and stirred a spoonful of sugar into it. That's how we are going to be in your country. So the envoy goes back to the Gujarati king, tells him the story, and the king is so impressed, he promptly invites the entire shipload to disembark and settle down there. And that's the beginning of the Parsi community in India. Now, when you think about these stories, that's the India of soft power. That's an India which is embracing, accommodating, inclusive. Not the India that starts, looking for, I don't want to go into politics here, this is not the forum, but I think we can be better than we have been in some respects in recent years. And the more we go back to that original civilizational culture of what India was, the greater we will win the respect and love of the world. And that's where our soft power will go.
With that, a big thank you to Dr. Shashi Tharoor. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your candid answers. And truly a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor. I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Shekhar Patel and Mr. G. Ram Reddy to kindly join us on stage for the felicitation of Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Requesting you gentlemen to please join us on stage. Also requesting the National Youth Wing leadership team to please be on standby. We'd like to use this opportunity for us to meet Dr. Tharoor. And ladies and gentlemen,